Welcome, welcome. I want to say I am looking forward to this conversation. This is really about how to be able to attract those right clients to you. And this is Lauren Fogelman with Business Success Solution. What the topic is riches is in the niches, a guide for accounting firm owners who are looking to really move in that direction. And my conversation today is with Terrell Turner. Some of the things that we're going to touch on is what it really means as far as niche and how to do it right, addressing the fear of being stuck in one niche forever, and niche ideas and opportunities for accounting firms. Once again, be ready to take some notes because Terrell is very generous. He's going to be sharing a lot, and then we'll let you know how to connect with him as we wrap up. A little bit about Terrell Turner. He's the CEO of a New York Times recognized accounting firm 3 times for the 40 under 40 CPA, and also twice for top 20 globally financial influencer, and also a New York Times Square feature CFO. His accounting firm is focused on providing bookkeeping and CFO services for law firms, and Terrell hosts multiple podcasts and is a sought-after public speaker in the accounting and legal industry. You can learn more about Terrell Turner and TL Turner Group at tlturnergroup.com. So now that we have all the introductions, really looking forward to talking with you, Terrell. So excited about our conversation today. So thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And a little bit before we really jump in is how did you get into the niche for your firm with attorneys and law firms?
Yeah, so I started the firm back in on April 1st of 2020, which is probably not the most ideal time to start a firm. 'Cause it was at the height of the pandemic, and back then I was just working with anyone who would pay me. And I really looked at over time as like that probably wasn't going to be the, most stable long-term strategy. So I had done some consulting with different types of businesses. And after doing consulting with about 17 different law firms, I realized like I understand their business model and I understand that they need help. I know how to help them. And so we started to really lean in, and there's some other details that I'll explain a little bit more in our later in our
Mhm.
conversation, but that's kind of how we got started.
And we're going to be talking today about the word niche or niche, depending on which you prefer, but it can mean different things to different people. And when I and I'm interested in knowing your perspective. So, how do you define a niche when it comes to accounting firms?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, it comes down to, in the broadest sense, just a identifiable category or characteristic that, a group has in common. So I've seen some people that only look at, well, industry type as a niche. Like we focus on the legal industry, where people are like, oh, a niche is only an industry focus. And I'm like, no, a niche could be another type of category. Maybe you focus on women-owned businesses. Maybe that is your niche, or maybe you focus on, first generation business owners. Like maybe that is the niche that you focus on. I think it just comes down to what is the category, and it has to be something very specific and clear that you can express. This is the category, and that's the way I tend to look at niche.
And I think that that's really insightful because I know even in my own journey as I was searching, and I want to say it isn't something that happens overnight. There's some trial and error. It's kind of messy. At one time, I was working with couples in business, so that was about a segment like you were talking about the women-owned businesses. For me, it was couples in business together, and then it was eventually the industry of accounting firm owners. So I just want to say for other people that are listening to you, it's very valid that it doesn't have to be a vertical as far as a profession. It could be that certain segment or category. So as we're thinking about it, I know for me, niching down was really a great strategy, was something I was searching for. I was very intentional, but also there were some pitfalls, missteps. Like I said in the beginning, I started with couples in business. Now I'm working with accounting firm owners. So what would firm owners be wary about when they're trying to look for that niche or specialty?
Yeah, I think the first thing that you talked about was, being patient with yourself because it's not going to be an overnight thing. I mean, there will be some trial and error because I think part of finding that right niche is part of finding, who you are, like really defining like who do you work well with, like who do you want to work well with. And if you're a firm that has a team, meaning you have more people involved, then you also have to think about that dynamic with your team. Like, who does your team work well with? And that was something that, we had to navigate as well because I know that myself personally, I worked very well with people who had complex, problems or whether they needed financial modeling and calculations. Like, I worked well doing those things. But then when I looked at my team, I realized my team doesn't work well with those. And so if I based our niche all around what worked for me, then we wouldn't have been able to scale and build a more productive and efficient business. So I think the first thing that I've seen a lot of business owners do, especially accounting firms, is they tried to build the niche around the owner of the firm. Like, what does the owner like? And they completely forget to think about the rest of the team because I'm like, if you're leading a growing accounting firm as the owner, you're probably not going to be the one doing the work. It's your team that's going to be doing it. So you do need to take that into account as well.
Okay, so instead of taking the me approach, we ought to take the we approach, especially when you're not a solo business owner and you do have a team when you're starting to work with this. I also think that it's very insightful about looking at your team strengths and coming from a firm strengths position as opposed to looking at just what your strengths are that you bring into the table. So if there are firm owners that are joining us and they're interested in it, but they've been a generalist all this time, and they would like to really start to narrow things down, but they don't always know where to start because it's a process. So, do you have any thoughts on how to start to identify or figure out what would be a profitable niche for a firm owner?
Yeah, so I think in finding that interest, what I tend to tell a lot of firms or people who have been generalists is if we sit down and let's make a list of, let's say your top 5 or top 10 clients that you have worked with. And then after we make that list, and I usually don't define what top means. I let them define, like in your mind, if I said top clients, what comes to mind? Like, who are the names? Let's put those names down in one list. And then next, let's put why was that person in the top 10 or the top 5 for you? And one of the things you start to see as you write that out is you start to see a trend. Like there are some common factors between the clients that you really enjoyed working with. And what we start to do is say, okay, if there is a common, trend between your top 10 clients, that might be an indicator of where you can start to lean in and identify as your niche if it's a category. And then we can start looking at things like, okay, all right, the type of business owners that fit that criteria that you just wrote out is okay, all right, how big are their businesses usually? And we can start to do more of the quantitative kind of market assessment, like how big are those types of businesses? And then we can also ask ourselves questions like, okay, all right, what type of access do you have to more people like this? Like, can you get in front of more people who fit this criteria? And then just as every accounting firm should do, we need to actually look at the pricing and we need to ask ourselves, what kind of pricing could this, segment or this category afford to pay? And is that going to be profitable for your business? And some of those times, what you may find out is after going through that exercise, the area that you want to focus on, they can afford to pay the prices that make sense for your firm to be, profitable. So then you need to go back and say, okay, all right, we need to identify another category and go through that same process and ask ourselves, can we charge a price that is going to allow our firm to be profitable? Because I think as a business owner, you do want to take into account what do I like to do? Who do I like to work with? But you can't forget that you are running a business and it needs to be profitable. So you do have to have that quantitative analysis and discussion about, can we charge a price that actually leads to profitability?
And when you're talking about common factors, are you looking at more demographics or personality factors?
Yeah, so I encourage people to look at both because I think you may find that your trend is around personality factors to where you may say, again, like, hey, I really like working with, business owners, businesses that are run by single moms. If that's the angle that stands out when you make your top 10 list, we look at it and we say, well, they're in multiple types of industries, but one common factor is every one of these businesses are run by a single mom. That may be a
Hmm.
personality indicator of, hey, maybe that's a category you gravitate to, because I do think something about that niche is, something about your own personality or your team's personality, because you and your team seem to be gravitating to a certain type of personality. And my thing is, it's going to make it so much easier, and the process is going to be so authentic when you start working with more. If single moms is your category, if you start working with more single moms, they're going to feel like you understand their challenges, you understand their situation. And I think you can build it that way. Or in my case, when I looked at the legal industry, one of the things that we tend to gravitate to is, one is simplifying the accounting and finance for non-finance owners. Plus,
Mhm.
because we run an accounting firm, a law firm is very, the business of a law firm is very similar to an accounting firm. Like, my team understood that, I understood that, and we understood how to make the numbers simple. And we realized there was a big connection within the legal industry. Plus, we looked at things like, a lot of the lawyers we knew other lawyers, which meant it would be easier for us to get referrals. And then
Right.
plus, every lawyer has to be part of a association, whether it's a state bar or whether it's a regional or whether it's a national association. So we said, hey, the associations could make it easier for us to get in front of our ideal clients. So when we stacked up all of those factors, we realized, hey, based on the pricing that we could charge law firms, we could build a scalable, profitable firm by targeting this market. So it could be an industry focus or it could be a personality focus.
Mhm. And I think that they actually go a little bit hand in hand, because what I found for myself is that I was able to identify personality fit first. And then from being aware of what personalities I work best with, I found that they tend to gravitate towards certain professions. And then I was able to look at those professions and see what was best fit for me also. I also believe that what you're sharing about certain industries and professions need to have ongoing continuing education. They're required to belong to associations, is actually something that makes it easier for firms that are looking a niche. Is who is it that needs those ongoing CPEs every year or some other type of continuing education, and they are seeking out training. So that might be a way to really get in front of that niche also. So I love that you shared that, Terrell. And speaking about moving this direction, as you said, it's something that doesn't necessarily happen overnight. You need a lot of patience. And are there like any realistic timelines to expect when you're starting to move in this direction, and also when you want to see that return on your investment of starting to solidify your niche?
Yeah, so for us, I can say is, it took us some time to really narrow it down to that niche that we wanted to focus on onto law firms. But once we clarified that law firms were our target audience, and it took us about maybe, a month and a half, 2 months to kind of really tailor our content and our marketing approaches. Like, we create a lot of content on social media. So we had to really tailor our content to that audience.
Mhm.
Now, I would say it took us probably about a month and a half to really get rolling with that. But then it probably took 4 to 6 months to really start getting some really decent traction in that area. And part of that is because we had already been creating content for a general audience. So it took some time, I guess, in the algorithm for some of our older content to kind of fall off people's timeline to where they started to consistently see us focusing on law firms. But after about 4 to 6 months, where we really started to see a lot deeper penetration into that industry, and then we started probably about 8 months in, we started getting asked to participate and speak at different legal conferences and to do webinars within the legal industry. So I would say, all in all, it took us about 8 months to really start developing a public reputation within the industry. And from there, we just continue to double down and build even more.
And I think that all firms work at their own pace. So for you, to me, it sounds like 4 to 6 months for really seeing that traction is probably a very fast pace because you were very, very focused. Does that feel true for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I do think part of it also is, like I said, we create a lot of content. So
Hmm.
we are, we were doing about, 2 podcasts a week, and also intermediate like content videos that we were putting out. So we were literally posting like 1 to 2 times a day. So we put out a lot of content so we could get to our audience
Hmm.
faster just because of the volume that we were putting out. Now, I would say, to someone who isn't doing that, then I would say realistically, you probably want to look, between that 8 months to a year to really start really seeing, some, I guess you would say, if you look in the terminology of like a farming, is before you start seeing the plants kind of bud through the soil, you
Hmm.
might look at a longer time frame.
Hmm. And I think that that's something to just recognize is that not everybody is as marketing savvy as you are. So it might take a little bit more time because of the fact that they're not pushing out as much content. So it'll be on their feed longer, the older content and who they were originally serving. And I think the other thing that comes up is changing your website. So how soon did you do that as well to really align with that new direction that you were moving in with the law firms?
Yeah, so that one took a little bit of time because I mean, we really didn't have like a full marketing team to
Mhm.
do that, and be honest, at the time we didn't have the money to pay someone else to do it. And so we really looked at it as, all right, what things can we change the fastest? The fastest thing we could change is what we were saying in conversations when I would talk to other people. So that one we changed first, and then we looked at, okay, social media was a low cost, fast change we could make, whether it was the profile picture that I have on my LinkedIn or Facebook page, or like the banner. We could change that pretty
Mhm.
quickly. But then when it came down to the website, it probably took us about maybe 6 to 7 months before we got around to updating the website, just because we didn't really have anyone on our team who was really web savvy, and we didn't have the money to pay someone to update it.
Mhm.
But then also, we needed to kind of give ourselves some time to understand what were the common pain points that this new niche was feeling. Because what we wanted to put on our website, we wanted to make sure that it spoke to the problems and the challenges and the concerns that this new niche audience had. And so I think we used that kind of 6, 7 months to kind of research, because we recognize that, hey, our website is going to be the first impression for many people who, if the website is the first thing that they see of
Mhm.
us, it's going to be our first impression. And we wanted people to see that and say, hey, this organization, this firm speaks to my problems, or they understand me. And so it took some research before we could actually make the change. Now, when I say 6 to 7 months, that was making minor changes. Now, to do a whole rebrand, that probably took more like a year to a year and a half before
Mhm.
we fully got that done.
And I just want to say the fact that you were really thinking about your website and what content you want to put on it is important. So if anybody is looking for a website that stands out, then go to Terrell's website at toturnergroup.com and let it inspire you about what's possible so that you don't look canned like everybody else and you actually have something that stands out and grabs the attention of your clients. So I know we weren't talking about me doing that, but I think it is so important to have that website that speaks to your clients, and you want to go ahead and check out Terrell's website for that. So with that being said, there's always this fear that, oh my gosh, if I choose a niche, what if I choose the wrong niche and I'm going to be here forever now and I don't really like them? So any thoughts that you have about that fear of being stuck in this marriage forever and not ever being able to escape from it?
Yeah. I went through some of those very same emotions, which is why I hesitated to really pick a niche. Because I was just like, well, what about all these other people who are gonna, potentially call me and my phone is gonna stop ringing? And then I had to get honest with myself and say, like, okay, honestly, how often is your phone ringing? Well, it's not ringing as much as I'm kind of making it more
Mhm.
dramatic than I needed to. And then when I really was like, you know what? This is going to help us with our messaging, make our messaging more clear. And when we started really focusing on, saying, that, hey, we work with law firms, like we provide these solutions for law firms. What was very interesting is a lot of non-law firms started calling us. And they would call, and the first thing they would say is, I know you work with law firms, but hey, can you just hear me out? And
Mhm.
so it changed the dynamic of the relationship that we had because I'm like, before we were desperate trying to get everybody to call us. Now, when we got more, focus on law firms, non-law firm companies would call us because they liked, some of the content that we had put out, or
Mhm.
they liked the way that we simplified or explained financial concepts. And so what we started to see is some of those non-law firms that came to us understood that, hey, I know you guys are focused on law firms, but hey, here's what I need help with. And what we also saw was we saw an improvement in the pricing that we could charge as well, because if a person wasn't a law firm and they knew, hey, I am asking you to operate outside of what you do, I have to be willing to pay your price because I'm asking you to do something that you have clearly expressed you are focused on law firms, but I'm asking you to deviate. So we started seeing that non-law firms were actually willing to pay the same price that law firms were paying for the service that we could provide. And so I would say to that fear, most people don't realize is when you start getting clear about who you serve, that is probably not going to stop your phone from ringing. It's almost like I guess you would say like a light at night with moss. It's just going to attract more attention when you start to be clear about who you serve. And I do think people will have a higher level of respect for what you do. And if a let's say, professional within the industry you're focused on, or the business type that you're focused on, if they call you, they're going to call and they're going to have a whole lot more respect for what you do and how you do it because they know that they're not within that niche, but they still want to work with you.
Mhm. And here's the beauty of what I'm hearing you say, and it's been my experience also, is that it simplifies for you as the firm owner who to focus on and what content to put out. So instead of trying to be all things to all people, you're now very, very targeted because you know what their struggles are in that particular niche. But you're going to appeal to some people outside of it. And then you can choose as a business owner whether you want to take that person on as a client or not. The other thing is that once again, if people see you as the specialist and you are offering certain solutions, then it has a higher perceived value. Because my guess is that there isn't much that you really changed that you were doing internally for your clients. It's just that the way that you were being positioned and seen now was something that had perceived higher value. Was that true for you and your firm?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we were perceived with higher value
Mm-hmm.
from potential clients and even other accounting firms because when we got very clear about who we worked with and we were very consistent in the messaging about who we work with, we started getting more referrals from other accounting firms because
Mm.
I remember having conversations with accounting firms and they asked, "Oh, who do you work with?" Back before we define a niche, oh, we work with professional service organizations, small business owners. And a lot of accountants would say, "Oh, that's our same market." And it would almost be like, okay, now there was this tension of
Mm.
competition between us. But now when any firm asks, like, yeah, we do bookkeeping and CFO work for law firms. They're like, oh, really? Hey, you know what? I know a couple law firms. And what we realize is by being clear about who we work with, it also changed the dynamic of referrals from other
Mhm.
accounting firms because there have been many accounting firms who have reached out and said, hey, I came across a law firm. You were the first person I thought about because they're not a good fit for us. But hey, do you mind if I make an introduction? And we started to see that have a very positive impact in our business as well.
And with that being said, it's definitely a learning curve. It's an evolution. So in the beginning for me, I actually straddled between marketers and accounting professionals. I liked both. I liked the differences that each brought to the table, but there were some signs for me that the accounting firm owners were a better fit. So is it possible that people, as they're moving in this direction of having a niche, realize that, well, maybe what I thought wasn't the right fit? What type of red flags or signs would somebody want to be aware of to realize that maybe it's time to pivot?
Yeah, I think the first one I would say is if you recognize that it's not profitable. I think, as a business owner, you do want to pay attention to that. And when you start asking yourself, based on what this type of organization is asking for, this isn't going to be profitable. Very specific example. Early on, we thought our niche was going to be restaurants. And what we quickly realized is based on their tight margins and based on what they needed, and we just didn't have the capacity to scale our team to the point to make that a profitable segment. So we recognize, okay, lack of profitability was a sign for us. This is probably not the niche that we wanted to focus on. And then you look at things like skill set. If what they're asking for, as far as the help they need, if it's beyond your skill set, for example, companies that needed to go through audits, we realized like we didn't have the staffing to support a client who was going through an audit because there's a lot of interaction you would need to have with the auditors if your client is through an audit. And we just didn't have the staffing structure to support that. So we said, okay, all right, businesses that go through public audits from public accounting firms, that's probably not a good fit for us. We just don't have the staffing to support that. And then I do think you want to pay attention to, again, is your team, because you may start going down a path and you start realizing like, hey, my team is really uncomfortable working with this industry, or hey, they're not able to really understand some of those unique accounting factors about this industry. Then that could be a sign of either I needed to train my staff or I need to recognize we're not the right type of firm for that industry. And then you can open yourselves up and say, hey, you know what? What other types of industries that may be somewhat related to, or maybe in a similar vein, like you talked about accountants and marketers, like
Mhm.
both are professional services. So maybe professional services is the broader category, but you got to find the right business within the professional service. And I think, giving yourself the freedom to do that. And I think the biggest thing for that I would say for a lot of people is that you got to be able to admit to yourself that, hey, a change needs to happen and that it's okay to make that change because eventually, like I said, the market will accept your change if you continue to consistently promote and talk about, hey, we're making this change. Here's why we're changing our focus because we feel like we can better serve this audience. And I think when you do that, that there's a lot more opportunity than just staying with an industry that just, or a practice area or a type of business that just isn't the right fit.
And so what I'm hearing you say is you want to look at the margins for that particular business industry and whether they're highly profitable or they're very, very lean. You want to look at the skill set as far as what they require from your team and also your team's skill set and their comfort level working with that type of personality. So one of the things that's coming up for me as you're talking about this is as you made this transition, what happened to your current clients? Did you keep most of them? Did they tend to eventually move on? How did that work with your firm?
Yeah, so I tend to operate with a high level of accountability and a sense of responsibility to the clients that we take on. So for some of the clients that it made sense for them to stay with us, like we retain those clients. So we still have some, non-law firm clients and we continue to work with them now. One of the things that I had to be honest about is, okay, what does the scope of work need to look like?
Mm-hmm.
And also be willing to make adjustments in the pricing because if I am scaling back some of the scope of work, then I also need to understand that I'm changing the value that that client was getting. And so some of those we looked at relationships to say what still made sense and we negotiated with those clients on some price reduction as well as some, scope of work reduction. And then there were other clients who just weren't a good fit to where I had a conversation with the client. I explained to them what we were doing. And then I also put in the extra work to say, hey, we're going to help in any way that we can with the transition. In some of the cases, I knew other accounting firms who were a better fit for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I went the extra mile to make an introduction between the two. And then for some that found their own alternative, accounting or bookkeeper, what I did is made sure we were proactive in helping them go through a smooth transition. Because what I didn't want them to do is I didn't want them to leave with a bad taste in their mouth because, we wanted to protect our reputation as well as we felt the responsibility to also provide value even as they were leaving. We still felt like, hey, we can still add some value in this transition process, and we were going to do the best we could to do right by our clients and former clients.
It sounds like mainly you want to be client-centered the whole time through this transition and really look at what's in their best interest. So the next thing that comes up for me is, okay, trends, opportunities, any particular areas or niches that you see significant growth or opportunity in right now?
Yeah, so there are some pretty interesting opportunities, I think, across various industries. And one of the areas that I definitely see is you have, you know, depending on like, what your skill set is, where I've seen is entrepreneurs who want to get into subscription-based kind of business models. So when it comes down to subscription-based business models, there are a lot of factors to consider because typically the way a subscription business model works is you're going to make a lot of investment on the front end and
Mm-hmm.
over time you become profitable. Well, for businesses like that, they really need to understand their numbers as they're making decisions because, you can easily run out of cash and run out of money. So they need a good, healthy relationship with an accountant that can actually kind of break that down and point things out to them that they may miss because they're just moving so fast. And then also, I think, and when it comes down to professional services, and there's a wide range of professional services. I think some like in the dental practices, most feedback that I get from, I guess professional service industries that require an advanced degree, like a medical doctor or a dentist, or something in that vein, like they tend to be very focused on their craft, but have zero understanding about the finance or the business side of what they're doing. So I've
Mm-hmm.
seen some big opportunities when it comes down to dentists because what, as inflation starts to rise and they're trying to figure out like, hey, well, I'm not making as much money as I used to make because they don't really know their numbers. they don't know how to understand and interpret what's happening. And I think that becomes a great opportunity for, accountants and bookkeepers to be able to step in and say, hey, we can help organize your numbers and help provide some clarity to a blind spot that you have so they can
Mhm.
continue to navigate their business well. Um, and I've also seen some opportunity when it comes down to franchises. And the good thing about franchises is that a lot of times the person who's starting a franchise typically doesn't have an accounting and finance background, but they do need to understand their numbers because they have a built-in cost that they're gonna have to pay. Like they have franchise fees that they're gonna have to pay.
Mhm.
They also have operating costs that they're gonna have to cover. And they really do need to understand their numbers if they're gonna take that to the next level. And I think those are some industries that I think have some really big opportunity where accountants and bookkeepers can really play a healthy role in adding a lot of value.
Okay, the three that you were mentioning, subscription businesses, if anybody's interested in finding out more about that, because they have some nuances like you mentioned, go to Ron Baker's book, Time's Up, and it's a deep dive into accounting for subscription businesses. It gives you all the ins and outs. I agree with professional services, dental practices, medical practitioners. They are focused on serving their patients, but they don't necessarily understand how to run their practice. And there are so many business owners, especially franchises, that go into it, but they don't understand, they're not business savvy. And I think the thing about franchises also is that not only they're not necessarily working on their own, they do have some support from the franchise corporation too. So they have not just themselves and their business, but they have this corporate background that helps them want to succeed. And that's probably beneficial to them and unique as well. So,
Yep. And can I say
yeah,
one thing on that?
yeah.
Because one of the things that I started to learn as I dug a little bit deeper with franchises is, to your point, like they have a corporate office who helps on the operational side, but within a lot of the franchise agreements, there is kind of like this, I guess you would call it like the Chinese wall between whether the franchise company can offer like accounting and business advice. They usually try to draw a very, very clear distinction to where
Mm.
they'll help with operational advice and about how to run the franchise, but they usually try to be very hands on. One is because there's liability there. And the best advice that they offer is, hey, to the franchise owner, is you need to get your own accountant and talk to your own accountant about that. To where I'm like, wow, there's a very big opportunity there because that's one of those pieces that the parent franchise company within some of the legal agreements does not provide, and they try to avoid providing, which means it creates a vacuum for accountants and bookkeepers to be able to fill.
So that could be a great specialty or niche. It's a golden gem that you just shared with us. And I want to just say overall, you made so many powerful points today. Some of the things that we talked about is how to really start moving in this niche, some of the pitfalls, the opportunities, as well as some of the things to consider as you're evolving. So Terrell, if anybody wants to be able to connect with you, they want to talk more about niches with you, law firms, what's the best way for them to connect?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably the best and easiest way to connect. I'm pretty much on LinkedIn a lot, and I do my best to respond to messages. So if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I do my best to respond. I know right now I'm in travel season with traveling to different conferences and speaking engagements, so I may not respond right away, but I do aim to respond to all the messages. So LinkedIn would be the best and easiest way.
Fantastic. He is very much out there. You can catch all of his videos on LinkedIn as well. So check out his page. Terrell, thank you so much for the engaging conversation for everybody that joined us. This is Lauren Fogelman with Business Success Solution, showing accounting firm owners how to double their income working half the time.